Gold has long been a symbol of wealth, power, and dominion. But during the Second World War, one of the most valuable assets ever amassed was also one of the most deeply contested, hidden in vaults ferried across borders and used to finance shadowy post-war enterprises. The story of Nazi gold touches on genocide, neutral diplomacy, covert operations, and unresolved questions that continue to echo into the present. What happened to the vast quantities of gold looted by the Nazis? Who profited from it? And did some of these treasures really pass through the vaults of Switzerland, the corridors of the Vatican, and the hands of Allied governments? This is the inside story, and this is where history refuses to stay buried. War, theft, and the machine of plunder. During the Nazi regime, as Europe fell under occupation, a systematic program of looting was set in motion. The Third Reich's economic warfare aimed not just at conquering territory, but at seizing the wealth of those it deemed enemies, particularly Jewish communities. Creditors, civic institutions, private owners, and entire families were stripped of their assets. Gold, in the form of jewelry, rings, denture fillings, and bullion, was extracted from victims of deportation and mass murder, especially in concentration camps. Survivor testimonies and wartime records confirm that SS units, known as Sonderkommandos, were ordered into gas chambers and barracks to remove gold, teeth, and jewelry from corpses. The metal was then processed by firms like Degussa and later melted into bars at the Reichsbank. This was not incidental loss, it was deliberate economic exploitation at the heart of genocide. By the end of the war, millions of Reichsmarks worth of gold had been accumulated from these sources. The vaults of wealth and war, Swiss accounts and neutral diplomacy. Switzerland, officially neutral throughout World War II, maintained financial relationships with both Axis and Allied powers. It was in this neutrality and its banking secrecy that the first controversies began. Declassified intelligence documents and Allied monitoring reports from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, detail how Swiss banks took in large quantities of German gold between 1942 and 1944. An estimated 2 billion Swiss francs worth of bars were moved through Switzerland to Portugal and Spain. These gold bars were then used by the Reich to buy essential war materials on neutral markets. This collaboration was not passive. By mid-1943, Swiss bankers were willingly accepting Nazi gold for deposit, despite warnings from Allied governments that such assets were likely seized property. The volume and scale of these transactions were large enough to sustain parts of the Nazi war economy, a fact that Allied intelligence quietly documented, if not publicly condemned at the time. Routes, submarines, and land of fire. Other lines of inquiry, some more speculative than others, trace the movement of looted wealth beyond Europe. U-boats operating in the Atlantic and Pacific are alleged in some sources to have transported bullion and valuables to remote destinations, including South America. In December 1996, a Patagonia newspaper published a photograph claimed to show a Nazi submarine in a Patagonian bay, supposedly carrying gold for war criminals fleeing overseas. Shortly after publication, the FBI investigated these claims and concluded they were likely part of a British intelligence propaganda operation designed to influence German morale in the closing stages of the war. Though intriguing, this particular narrative rests on weak documentary support and contested photographic interpretation. More substantive, if still partially documented, is the Land of Fire operation, a name given in captured reports to a mission in which armored convoys moved millions of pounds of gold across Germany and France to Spanish ports for U-boat pickup. Some historians accept elements of this operation as plausible. Others caution that records are incomplete and that some details derive from post-war oral accounts rather than primary sources. Allied discovery and Cold War complications. In 1945, Allied troops discovered massive stashes of gold hidden in vaults across Germany, seized SS gold hidden in mines, bank basements, and farmhouses. These findings should have been straightforward evidence of wartime theft. But even as Allied forces uncovered these hoards, other troubling behaviors emerged. American military personnel were later accused of taking small quantities of recovered gold. Some shipments of looted valuables were transported by U.S. forces to France or the United States for inventory, then mysteriously disappeared from record. In the spring of 1946, British troops seized 150 million Swiss francs worth of gold on the Austro-Swiss border. Another 200 million francs is documented as being transported to Spain and Argentina, not as stolen booty, but through an unofficial pipeline allegedly coordinated in part with Vatican intermediaries. This alleged Vatican involvement centers on a controversial hypothesis that anti-communist factions within the Church used confiscated gold, knowingly or not, to fund post-war resistance movements and political efforts in Europe. Vatican officials have consistently denied these claims. Vatican, intelligence agencies, and the backed currency controversy. Perhaps the most contested chapter in this saga is the question of whether gold, originally stolen from Holocaust victims, entered the Vatican's financial networks. The primary claim arises from post-war intelligence and economic reports. In 1947, nearly $10 million in cash was laundered through European and U.S. banks, some of it placed into secret accounts used to finance covert anti-communist operations. According to a 1997 U.S. government report, some of those clandestine funds passed through Vatican and related banking conduits, although the official purpose was to stabilize European currencies, not to reward or hide Nazi loot. This back currency, as it came to be known, was used in Italy to support the Christian Democrat Party in its electoral struggle against communist forces. A political battle at the beginning of the Cold War, much of the gold was never returned to Jewish communities or surviving heirs. Whether the Vatican acted as a knowing custodian of stolen wealth, an unwitting intermediary in broader Allied economic policy, or simply a participant in complex post-war finance remains debated among historians. Official Vatican histories assert that any assets received were part of legitimate stabilization efforts coordinated by the Tripartite Gold Commission, established in 1946 to oversee restitution and reconciliation. Argentina, escape networks, and Otto Skorzeny. South America became a significant waypoint for numerous high-ranking Nazis fleeing Europe. Argentina, under President Juan Perón, welcomed many of these fugitives. Declassified embassy dispatches from the U.S. State Department detail how Nazis sent over $1 billion in assets to Argentina in the late stages of the war and its aftermath. These assets included cash, gold, approximately 2,500 kilograms, diamonds, jewelry, and currency. Perón reportedly invested some of this capital in ranches, banks, and insurance firms. Submarines, once again, enter the narrative. Dozens of U-boats are documented to have surfaced off Argentine coasts in 1944 and 1945, carrying refugees and possibly loot. These facts have stronger documentary basis than the earlier Patagonia claims, though historians still parse between verified logs and post-war myth-making. Among the architects of Nazi escape networks was Otto Skorzeny, an SS officer and one of Hitler's most daring commandos. Skorzeny facilitated escapes for Mussolini and others during the war. In the post-war era, he allegedly played a role in organizing ratlines, routes through which Nazis escaped to Spain, Argentina, and beyond. Skorzeny himself escaped Allied custody in 1948 and later lived in Spain as a businessman with alleged protection from Western intelligence officers who valued his anti-communist expertise. Whether elements of the gold itself were used as incentives in these networks is a matter of conjecture, but the convergence of wealth, intelligence, and exfiltration routes is a recurring theme. Restitution, cover-ups, and unanswered questions. In the ensuing decades, efforts were made to right some of these economic wrongs. The Tripartite Commission dispersed gold and cash to nations whose citizens had suffered under Nazi occupation. Still, restitution was incomplete. As of 1997, some 5.5 tons of gold, valued at tens of millions of pounds, remained unreturned, locked in the vaults of the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Jewish and survivor advocacy groups have maintained that very little of this value reached the individuals and families from whom it was stolen. Letters, testimonies, and archival data indicate that the Allies, particularly Britain, were hesitant to antagonize Swiss banking interests even while negotiating for reparations, leading to agreements that waived claims against Swiss banks in exchange for access to select assets. The official U.S. government report on Nazi gold, released in May 1997, acknowledged that the resultant cover-up was part of the post-war political landscape, influenced by Cold War priorities and diplomatic sensitivities. A legacy of wealth and accountability. The saga of Nazi gold is not a single story, but a tapestry of intersecting narratives: theft and genocide, neutral commerce and covert diplomacy, intelligence operations and political realignments. Some elements are well documented: the seizure of wealth in camps, the use of Swiss banking channels, the Allied discovery of hidden hoards. Others are murkier, supported by fragments of evidence and contested interpretations. What remains unequivocal is this: millions of pounds of gold were taken from people who survived only to be murdered, and much of that wealth was never restored to their heirs. In the end, the question is not just where the gold went, but what it cost, not in francs or dollars, but in human dignity and lives.